The silence in Maplewood Community Church shattered like crystal when Max began to howl. The German shepherd's mournful cry pierced through Pastor William's gentle eulogy, echoing off wooden pews where 200 mourners had gathered to honor Helen Webb's peaceful passing. This wasn't grief, it was something far more desperate. Gasps rippled through the congregation as Max threw his massive body against Helen's white coffin, his claws scraping against polished wood with sounds that made everyone wince. Dorothy Martinez gripped her worn Bible tighter, her 75-year-old hands trembling as she whispered, "Lord, have mercy, that dog's trying to tell us something." 6-year-old Emma Thompson tugged her father's sleeve, her innocent voice cutting through the chaos. "Daddy, Max only cries like that when someone's in trouble." Detective James Thompson felt ice flood his veins as Max's amber eyes locked onto his, wild, desperate, pleading. "Get that animal out of here," someone shouted. But what if Max knew something they didn't? What if Helen Webb's funeral was hiding a secret that could destroy everything? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching. From now, let's continue with the story. The morning had started like any other Tuesday in Maplewood, Colorado, where the population of 8,000 souls lived by the rhythm of school bells and shift changes at the lumber mill. Detective James Thompson kissed his 6-year-old daughter Emma goodbye at exactly 7:30, same as always, watching her skip toward the backyard sandbox where adventures waited in endless piles of sand. "Be good for Dorothy if she comes by," James called, adjusting his badge one final time. Emma waved, her blonde pigtails catching the early sunlight, as Max, their 4-year-old German shepherd, settled into his usual protective position beneath the old oak tree. The dog's amber eyes never left the little girl who had become his entire world since joining the Thompson family 3 years ago. Next door, Marcus Webb pressed his face against the kitchen window, watching Emma with an intensity that would have alarmed anyone who noticed. At 34, Marcus had the hollow-eyed look of a man carrying unbearable weight. His mother Helen lay unconscious in the hospital bed they'd moved into their living room 6 months ago, her stroke having stolen her voice, but not her awareness of her son's deteriorating mental state. Marcus whispered to the empty air, "Lily's back, Mama. I told you she'd come home to Daddy." He'd been having these conversations for weeks now, convinced that Emma Thompson was actually his daughter Lily, returned to him 15 years after drowning in Miller's Pond. The similarity was uncanny. Both girls born on June 6th, both with the same golden hair, both with that fearless laugh that echoed through summer afternoons. Across the street, Dorothy Martinez hung her laundry with the practiced efficiency of 75 years on Earth. The retired third-grade teacher had taught half the children in Maplewood, including Marcus and James in their younger days. She'd noticed Marcus's odd behavior lately, talking to himself, setting 2 places at the dinner table, leaving his porch light on all night as if waiting for someone to come home. The Webb house held secrets that neighbors couldn't see. Marcus had spent his mother's entire life savings, $80,000 in medical debt, transforming the basement into a perfect replica of 6-year-old Lily's bedroom from 15 years ago. Pink walls, stuffed animals arranged just so, even the same Winnie the Pooh bedsheets she'd loved before the accident that stole her breath and shattered his sanity. James Thompson drove toward downtown Maplewood, unaware that his peaceful morning routine had been watched, studied, and memorized by desperate eyes. He couldn't know that his next-door neighbor had been planning for months, waiting for the perfect moment when love and madness would collide in ways that would test everything the small community believed about forgiveness, justice, and the bonds that hold families together. In her sandbox, Emma built castles while Max dozed nearby, neither aware that their ordinary Tuesday was about to become the day that changed everything. The plan had been forming in Marcus Webb's fractured mind for 3 months, ever since he'd first seen Emma Thompson playing in her backyard, and his broken heart had whispered the impossible: Lily had come home. Now, watching James's patrol car disappear around the corner at exactly 7:45, Marcus knew the moment had arrived. His hands trembled as he reached for the small bottle of his mother's leftover sedatives crushed and mixed into chocolate milk, Lily's favorite drink. "It's time, sweetheart," he whispered to the silent house where Helen lay unconscious, her breathing shallow but steady. "Daddy's going to bring our baby home." In the backyard next door, Emma hummed a tuneless song while constructing an elaborate sand city, complete with moats and towers. Max lay in his usual spot, but something felt wrong. The German Shepherd's ears twitched constantly, his nose testing the air for threats his canine instincts detected but couldn't identify. When Marcus's back gate creaked open, Max's head snapped up, hackles rising along his spine. "Hi there, Emma," Marcus called softly, his voice carrying that false brightness adults use when they're trying too hard to seem normal. "I have something really special to show you. Something I think a smart girl like you would love to see." Emma looked up from her sandbox, sand clinging to her small fingers. Her father had taught her about stranger danger, but Mr. Marcus wasn't a stranger. He was the quiet man next door who helped carry groceries and always waved hello. "What kind of special thing?" she asked, curiosity winning over caution the way it always did with 6-year-olds. "It's a surprise that belonged to a little girl just like you," Marcus said, stepping closer to the fence that separated their yards. His eyes held a fevered brightness that Emma was too young to recognize as dangerous. "She would have wanted you to have it, I think. But you have to come see it in my house." Max was on his feet now, positioning himself between Emma and the fence. A low growl rumbled in his chest, but Emma didn't hear it over her own excitement. "Can Max come too?" she asked, always thinking of her beloved companion. "Of course," Marcus lied smoothly, pulling out the chocolate milk. "But first, you must be thirsty from all that building. I brought you something to drink." The sweet smell of chocolate reached Max's sensitive nose, but underneath it was something else, bitter, chemical, wrong. The dog's warning bark split the morning air, sharp and urgent, but Emma was already reaching for the cup through the fence slats. "Max, shush," Emma scolded gently. "Mr. Marcus is being nice." She took a small sip, then another, the chocolate coating her tongue with artificial sweetness that masked the drug dissolving beneath. Dorothy Martinez, hanging the last of her sheets on the line across the street, heard Max's distressed barking and looked up just in time to see Marcus Webb lifting something over his fence. Her 75 years of experience reading children and troubled adults sent alarm bells ringing through her mind. That man's body language was all wrong, too eager, too focused, like a predator who'd found prey. "Emma, honey?" Dorothy called out, starting across the street, but her arthritic hips couldn't move fast enough. The sedatives worked quickly in Emma's small body. Her eyelids grew heavy and the sandbox seemed to tilt sideways. "I feel funny, Mr. Marcus," she mumbled, her words already slurring. "It's okay, sweetheart," Marcus whispered, reaching through the fence to catch her as she swayed. "Daddy's here now. Daddy's going to take care of everything." Max exploded into action, throwing his 70-pound frame against the fence with enough force to shake the entire structure. His barks turned into howls of desperation as he watched Marcus carry Emma toward his house. The German Shepherd had failed in his most sacred duty, protecting his little girl, and the sound that came from his throat spoke of anguish that transcended species. Dorothy's hands shook as she dialed 911, her teacher's instincts screaming that she was witnessing every parent's worst nightmare. "This is Dorothy Martinez at 1247 Maple Street," she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite her racing heart. "I need police immediately. I think someone just took the Thompson child." Inside Marcus's house, Emma found herself in a world that smelled like vanilla candles and old sadness. The living room was dominated by Helen's hospital bed, where the elderly woman lay motionless except for the rise and fall of her chest. But Marcus wasn't looking at his mother. His attention was fixed entirely on Emma, his eyes bright with a joy that was somehow more terrifying than anger would have been. "Welcome home, Lily," he whispered, carrying Emma toward the basement stairs. "Daddy kept your room exactly the way you left it. All your toys are waiting, and your bed is made with the Winnie the Pooh sheets you loved so much." Even through the fog of sedatives, Emma understood that something was very wrong. "I'm not Lily," she said, her 6-year-old voice small but determined. "I'm Emma Thompson, and I want to go home to my daddy." Marcus's face flickered with confusion, then settled back into that frightening smile. "You're just confused, sweetheart. It's been a long time since you've been home, but Daddy never stopped waiting, never stopped hoping you'd come back to me." Outside, Max had found a loose board in the fence and was working frantically to squeeze his large body through the gap. Splinters tore at his coat as he forced himself through the narrow opening, driven by a desperation that made physical pain irrelevant. His little girl was in danger, and nothing else in the world mattered. James Thompson was reviewing case files at the station when his phone rang. Dorothy's voice cut through his morning routine like a blade. "James, you need to come home right now. I think Marcus Webb has taken Emma." The words didn't make sense at first. Marcus was their neighbor, quiet and helpful. He brought their mail up when they were out of town. He'd never shown any interest in Emma beyond normal neighborly politeness. But as James raced through Maplewood's quiet streets, sirens wailing, Dorothy's words echoed in his mind along with a terrible new understanding. Marcus Webb had lost his daughter 15 years ago. Emma was 6 years old, the same age Lily had been when she drowned. They even shared the same birthday, June 6th, a coincidence that now felt like a cruel twist of fate. By the time James's patrol car screeched into his driveway, Max had made it through the fence and was throwing himself against Marcus's locked back door with the fury of a creature who would gladly die to save what he loved most. The German shepherd's howls carried across the neighborhood, a sound of pure anguish that made every parent within earshot think of their own children and feel their blood run cold. The house next door sat quiet as a tomb, keeping its secrets and its stolen treasure hidden in the basement where a broken man believed he was finally healing his shattered heart. The Maplewood Police Department's radio crackled to life at 8:17 a.m. with words that turned James Thompson's world upside down. "All units, we have a code Amber. 6-year-old Emma Thompson, blonde hair, blue eyes, last seen wearing pink overalls. Suspect is Marcus Webb, white male, 34, considered mentally unstable and potentially dangerous." James's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles went white as he raced through familiar streets that suddenly felt foreign and threatening. Behind him, 3 more patrol cars followed, their sirens cutting through the peaceful morning like screams. But it was the sound coming from his own backyard that made his blood freeze. Max's desperate howling, a sound he'd never heard from his normally calm German shepherd. Dorothy Martinez stood in her front yard, her weathered hands pressed to her mouth as she watched the chaos unfold. "I should have moved faster," she kept repeating to Officer Patricia Chen, who was taking her statement. "I saw him lift something over that fence, but these old bones just couldn't get there in time. That poor baby. That sweet little girl." The first thing James noticed when he burst through his back gate was Emma's favorite hair ribbon, bright yellow with tiny daisies, caught on a splinter of Marcus's fence. Max had torn through the wooden barrier and was now at Marcus's back door, his powerful claws leaving gouges in the painted wood as he tried frantically to reach Emma. "Max!" James called, but the dog was beyond hearing human commands. Every fiber of the German shepherd's being was focused on one thing: getting to his little girl. When James tried to pull him away from the door, Max spun around with wild eyes and bared teeth, not recognizing his master in his desperation. Captain Rodriguez arrived with the tactical unit just as James was examining the broken fence. "We've got the house surrounded," Rodriguez said grimly. "No movement visible from outside, curtains are drawn. We've tried calling the landline. No answer." Inside the house, Emma found herself in a basement that felt like stepping into someone else's nightmare. The walls were painted soft pink, exactly the shade her own room had been when she was 4. Stuffed animals lined shelves with mathematical precision, their button eyes staring down at her with expressions that seemed sad rather than comforting. In the corner sat a small bed with Winnie the Pooh sheets, and beside it a rocking chair where Marcus now sat, watching her with eyes that held 15 years of grief and madness. "This is your room, Lily," Marcus said softly, his voice taking on the sing-song tone parents use with very young children. "Daddy kept everything exactly the way you liked it. Your favorite teddy bear is right there on the bed, and I still have all your picture books." Emma's head felt fuzzy from whatever had been in the chocolate milk, but she fought to stay alert. Her father had taught her about emergencies, about staying calm and thinking clearly when things went wrong. "Mr. Marcus," she said carefully, "I think you're very sad about your little girl, but I'm not her. I'm Emma, and my daddy will be looking for me." For a moment, something flickered in Marcus's eyes, a shadow of sanity trying to surface through the delusion. He looked at Emma, really looked at her, and saw a frightened child who wanted nothing more than to go home. But then his mind pulled him back into the comfortable lie he'd been living for months. "You're just confused because you've been away so long," he said, reaching out to stroke her hair with trembling fingers. "But you're home now, and Daddy's never going to let anything hurt you again. Never going to let you go near that water where the bad things happen." Above them, the house shook as the tactical team prepared for entry. Max's barking had become hoarse from strain, but he continued his assault on the back door, now joined by Officer Chen's K-9 unit. The 2 German shepherds seemed to communicate in a language of desperate whines and urgent body language that spoke of lives hanging in the balance. Dorothy Martinez hobbled as fast as her 75-year-old legs would carry her to where James stood coordinating with the rescue team. "James, honey," she panted, "I need to tell you something about that boy. I've been watching him for months, and he's been talking to empty air, setting 2 places at dinner, leaving lights on like he's expecting someone. His poor mother's been unconscious since her stroke, and I don't think he's been taking his medication." The revelation hit James like a physical blow. Marcus wasn't a predator in the traditional sense. He was a broken father living in a fantasy where his dead daughter had somehow returned to him. It made him unpredictable in ways that were far more dangerous than simple criminal intent. "He thinks Emma is Lily," James said, the pieces falling into place with horrible clarity. "They're the same age, same coloring, even the same birthday. In his mind, he's not kidnapping someone else's child. He's rescuing his own daughter." Captain Rodriguez's tactical experience told him this changed everything. "Delusional subjects are often the most dangerous," he warned. "If he truly believes Emma is his deceased daughter, he might do anything to protect her from being taken away again." In the basement, Emma was discovering that sometimes being small could be an advantage. While Marcus sat in his rocking chair, lost in memories of bedtime stories he'd once read to Lily, Emma quietly explored her prison. The basement had one small window near the ceiling, too high and narrow for her to reach, but she could hear Max's frantic barking coming from somewhere above. "Max," she whispered as quietly as she could, and incredibly, the barking paused for just a moment, as if the dog had heard his name. Emma's heart leaped with hope. Max knew where she was. Max would find a way to save her. Marcus's head snapped up at the sound. "Who is Max?" he asked, his voice taking on a sharp edge that made Emma's stomach clench with fear. "He's my dog," Emma said honestly, too young to understand the value of lies in dangerous situations. "He's probably worried about me." "Dogs are dirty," Marcus said, his expression darkening. "Lily doesn't need a dirty dog. Daddy will get you something clean and safe instead." But Emma's chin lifted with the stubborn determination that every Thompson possessed. "Max isn't dirty. He's brave and smart, and he loves me. And I love him too." The sound of splintering wood echoed through the house as the tactical team finally breached the front door. "Police, everyone inside, come out with your hands visible." The commanding voice boomed through the house, but Marcus showed no sign of having heard it. Instead, he stood up from the rocking chair and moved toward Emma with an expression that made her back against the pink wall. "They're trying to take you away again," he whispered, his voice breaking with anguish. "Just like before. But Daddy won't let them. Daddy will keep you safe this time." Emma heard heavy footsteps on the floor above them, heard voices calling her name, heard Max's barking getting closer. But she also saw something in Marcus's eyes that scared her more than the basement or the pink walls or the strange toys. She saw a father's love twisted into something dangerous, a grief so deep it had drowned his reason. "Mr. Marcus," she said, her 6-year-old voice somehow finding strength she didn't know she possessed. "Your little girl Lily wouldn't want you to be sad anymore. She'd want you to let other people be happy." For a heartbeat, Marcus Webb's face crumpled with the weight of 15 years of unprocessed grief. In that moment, he saw Emma clearly, not as his returned daughter, but as someone else's precious child, someone else's reason for living. But then footsteps thundered down the basement stairs, and the moment of clarity shattered like glass. "Nobody move!" Officer Chen shouted, her weapon drawn as she took in the scene, a grown man standing over a frightened little girl in a room that looked like a shrine to childhood innocence gone wrong. And somewhere in the chaos of shouted commands and tactical movements, Max's howling suddenly stopped, replaced by a sound that chilled everyone who heard it. The German Shepherd had found another way in. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the basement as Max hurled his 70-pound body through the small window near the ceiling. The German Shepherd landed hard on the concrete floor, his coat bloody from broken glass, but his amber eyes blazed with protective fury as he positioned himself between Emma and Marcus. The dog's arrival transformed the tense standoff into something far more volatile. "Easy, boy," Officer Chen called out. But Max was beyond human commands. His entire world had narrowed to one imperative: protect Emma at any cost. The dog's hackles were raised, his lips pulled back to reveal teeth that had been bred for police work before an injury had retired him to family life. Marcus stumbled backward, his delusion cracking under the pressure of reality. "This isn't how it's supposed to happen," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Lily doesn't have a dog." "Lily was afraid of dogs after that neighbor's pit bull scared her when she was 3. "I'm not Lily!" Emma cried out, finding her voice as Max's presence gave her courage. "I'm Emma Thompson, and Max is my best friend, and I want to go home to my daddy." The tactical team filled the basement, their weapons trained on Marcus, but the cramped space and Emma's proximity to the suspect made any aggressive action impossible. Captain Rodriguez descended the stairs slowly, his hands visible, his voice calm and authoritative. "Marcus, I'm Captain Rodriguez. I knew your father back in the day. Good man, served his community well. I know you're hurting, son, but this isn't the way to heal that hurt." For a moment, Marcus's eyes cleared, and he looked around the pink basement as if seeing it for the first time. The shrine he'd built to his dead daughter suddenly looked grotesque and wrong, a monument to grief that had curdled into madness. "I just wanted her back," he whispered. "I just missed my little girl so much." Emma, with the fearless compassion that only children possess, stepped toward Marcus despite Max's protective growl. "I know you miss Lily," she said softly, "but she's in heaven now, and she wouldn't want you to hurt other people because you're sad." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, and he sank to his knees on the basement floor, finally seeing Emma as she truly was, not his dead daughter returned, but an innocent child he'd terrorized in his madness. "What have I done?" he sobbed. "Oh God, what have I done?" James Thompson appeared at the top of the basement stairs, his face a mask of controlled fury and parental anguish. The sight of his daughter standing in that twisted shrine, surrounded by the detritus of another man's grief, nearly broke his composure. But Emma's voice calling, "Daddy," gave him the strength to remain calm. "It's over, Marcus," James said, his detective training warring with his father's instincts. "Let's end this peacefully. Emma's not hurt, and that's what matters now." But as the immediate crisis resolved, a new emergency emerged. Emma, who had seemed remarkably composed throughout the ordeal, suddenly swayed on her feet. The sedatives Marcus had given her were still working through her small system, and the stress of the situation was taking its toll. "Something's wrong," Dorothy Martinez called from upstairs, where she'd insisted on staying despite police orders to evacuate the area. "That child's been drugged. Look at her eyes." Dr. Patricia Foster, who had arrived with the emergency medical team, pushed through the crowd of officers. One look at Emma's dilated pupils and sluggish responses confirmed Dorothy's assessment. "We need to get her to the hospital immediately. Whatever he gave her, it's still active in her system." The next few hours blurred together in a haze of emergency rooms and police statements. Emma was rushed to Maplewood General Hospital, where Dr. Foster worked to counteract the effects of Helen Webb's powerful anxiety medication that Marcus had dissolved in chocolate milk. James never left his daughter's side, watching the monitors that tracked her vital signs while guilt aided him like acid. "How did I miss the signs?" he asked Dorothy, who had appointed herself the family's unofficial grandmother and refused to leave the hospital waiting room. "I'm a detective, for Christ's sake. I'm supposed to notice when something's wrong." Dorothy's weathered hand covered his younger one. "Honey, that boy fooled all of us. Mental illness is a master of disguise, and grief can make people do things that shock even themselves. You couldn't have known." Max had been allowed to stay in the hospital parking lot, where he maintained a vigil that touched the hearts of everyone who saw him. The German Shepherd had refused food and water, his entire being focused on the building where his little girl fought to recover from her ordeal. Meanwhile, Marcus Webb sat in a holding cell at the Maplewood Police Department, fully conscious for the first time in months. The fog of delusion had lifted, leaving him to confront the full horror of what he'd done. Detective Sarah Martinez, James's partner, conducted the initial interview with a mixture of professional detachment and human compassion. "Tell me about Lily," she said gently, recognizing that Marcus's actions stemmed from unprocessed trauma rather than criminal intent. Marcus's face crumpled. "She drowned on her 6th birthday. We were having a party at Miller's Pond, and I turned away for just a moment to light the candles on her cake. When I looked back, she was floating face down in the water." His voice broke. "I tried CPR, tried everything, but she was already gone." "The doctors said she'd been under too long." The story poured out of him, how his wife had blamed him for their daughter's death, how the marriage had crumbled under the weight of grief, how he'd moved back home to care for his aging mother and never really learned to live without Lily. When Emma Thompson moved in next door with her blonde hair and fearless smile, Marcus's fractured mind had seen a miracle instead of a coincidence. "I know it's crazy," he whispered. "I know Emma isn't Lily, but for just a little while, I could pretend my daughter was alive again, that I hadn't failed to protect her." Dr. Foster's preliminary evaluation confirmed what everyone suspected. Marcus was suffering from complicated grief disorder, complicated by a psychotic break. "He needs intensive psychiatric treatment, not prison," she told Captain Rodriguez. "This man is sick, not evil." But the legal system wasn't designed for such nuanced distinctions. District Attorney Helen Morrison was facing re-election and needed to appear tough on crime, even when the crime stemmed from mental illness. "He kidnapped a child and drugged her," she declared at a hastily arranged press conference. "Intent doesn't matter. Results do." The community response was swift and divided. Some residents called for Marcus to be locked away forever, their parental fears overwhelming their capacity for compassion. Others, led by Dorothy Martinez and Pastor William Harrison, argued for treatment over punishment. "That boy needs healing, not vengeance," Dorothy told the packed town hall meeting 3 days after Emma's rescue. "And this community needs to ask itself how we let a neighbor suffer in silence for so long without offering help." James Thompson found himself caught between his rage at the man who had terrorized his daughter and his recognition that Marcus was as much a victim as a perpetrator. Emma, recovering steadily with Max never more than 3 feet from her side, surprised everyone with her perspective. "Mr. Marcus wasn't being mean on purpose," she told her father as they sat in her hospital bed, Max curled up beside them in defiance of hospital regulations. "He was just really, really sad about his little girl. Sometimes when people are too sad, they get confused about what's real." The wisdom of a 6-year-old cut through the legal complexities and political posturing like a knife. Emma's words were recorded by a local news crew and went viral on social media, sparking a national conversation about mental health, community responsibility, and the nature of justice. Meanwhile, another tragedy was unfolding quietly. Helen Webb, Marcus's mother, had been clinging to life in the ICU since her stroke 6 months earlier. The stress of her son's arrest and the media attention surrounding the case pushed her fragile system beyond its limits. Dorothy Martinez, who had been Helen's friend for over 30 years, sat by her bedside as the older woman's breathing grew shallow. "She knew something was wrong with Marcus," Dorothy told Pastor Harrison as they maintained their vigil. "I could see it in her eyes, the awareness trapped inside a body that couldn't speak or move. She was trying to warn us the only way she could." Helen Webb died peacefully on a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after her son's arrest. Her final gift to the community was a handwritten letter Dorothy found hidden in her jewelry box, dated 6 months earlier when Helen still had the use of her hands. "If you're reading this," the letter began in Helen's careful script, "then something terrible has happened, and my Marcus has done something that his grief-sick mind convinced him was love. I've tried to get him help, but he won't admit he needs it, and I'm too weak now to force the issue. Please remember that the boy you knew before Lily died is still inside him somewhere. Please don't let my failure to save him destroy any chance he has for redemption." The letter revealed that Helen had contacted mental health services multiple times trying to get involuntary commitment for her son. But the system's high bar for intervention meant that Marcus's deteriorating condition didn't qualify for forced treatment until he'd actually committed a crime. Dr. Foster read Helen's letter at a community meeting and wept openly. This woman was trying to protect both her son and this community. But our mental health system failed her. Failed all of us. Emma's recovery became a focal point for the town's healing process. The little girl who had been everyone's victim became their teacher, showing them that forgiveness wasn't weakness, but the greatest strength of all. When asked by a reporter what she wanted to happen to Marcus, Emma's answer stunned everyone. "I want him to get better," she said simply. "And I want him to help other sad daddies so they don't get confused like he did." Max, who had been Emma's constant companion throughout her recovery, seemed to understand that his protective duties had evolved. The German Shepherd began exhibiting behaviors that Dr. Foster recognized as those of a therapy animal, remaining calm around strangers, offering comfort to distressed visitors, somehow knowing when someone needed the healing presence of unconditional love. It's like he understands that protecting Emma now means protecting the whole community, Dorothy observed, watching Max gently approach a group of children who had come to visit Emma in the hospital. That dog's got more emotional intelligence than most humans I know. As Emma prepared to return home, the question of Marcus's fate remained unresolved. The legal system demanded justice, but the community was beginning to understand that justice and vengeance weren't the same thing. Helen's letter and Emma's forgiveness had planted seeds of compassion that were slowly taking root even in the hardest hearts. The real test would come when Emma faced Marcus again, not as victim and perpetrator, but as two souls seeking healing in a world that too often chose punishment over redemption. The courthouse steps of Maplewood County buzzed with tension as protesters gathered on both sides of the Marcus Webb case. On one side, parents held signs demanding justice for Emma and lock him up, their faces hard with the protective fury that comes when children are threatened. On the other side, mental health advocates and community members led by Dorothy Martinez carried banners reading "Healing, Not Hatred" and "Mental Health Matters." Inside the packed courtroom, Judge Patricia Reeves called for order as she prepared to hear arguments that would determine Marcus Webb's fate. The 34-year-old man sat at the defendant's table, his once neat appearance now gaunt and hollow-eyed from weeks of psychiatric evaluation. Beside him, his court-appointed attorney, David Chen, shuffled through papers that detailed 15 years of documented mental health decline. James Thompson sat in the front row with Emma between him and Dorothy Martinez, Max lying quietly at Emma's feet despite courthouse regulations. The German Shepherd had become something of a local celebrity, and even Judge Reeves had made an exception for the dog who had saved a child's life. Emma wore her best blue dress and clutched a hand-drawn picture she'd made for Mr. Marcus, a crayon drawing of two little girls holding hands under a rainbow. District Attorney Helen Morrison stood to present the state's case, her voice ringing with prosecutorial authority. Your Honor, the defendant kidnapped a 6-year-old child, drugged her with stolen medication, and held her prisoner in a basement shrine to his own deceased daughter. Mental illness may explain his actions, but it cannot excuse them. The people demand justice. The courtroom murmured with approval from those who saw Marcus as a dangerous predator, but Dr. Patricia Foster's testimony painted a different picture entirely. Marcus Webb is suffering from complicated grief disorder with psychotic features, she explained, her voice calm and professional. His actions, while inexcusable, stemmed from a complete break with reality. He genuinely believed Emma was his daughter, Lily, returned from the dead. In his delusional state, he thought he was rescuing her, not kidnapping her. Attorney Chen called a parade of witnesses who testified to Marcus's character before Lily's death, his devotion as a father, his work as a volunteer firefighter, his reputation as a kind and gentle man who had been destroyed by an unthinkable tragedy. Mrs. Eleanor Hutchins, Marcus's former neighbor, wept openly as she described watching him attempt CPR on his drowned daughter for 20 minutes, refusing to give up even after paramedics pronounced her dead. That man loved his little girl more than life itself, she testified. When she died, part of him died too. What happened to Emma Thompson was horrible, but it wasn't done by the Marcus Webb I knew. It was done by a man whose mind broke under unbearable grief. The most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source. Dr. Margaret Silverman, a psychiatric expert from Denver, had reviewed Helen Webb's hidden letters and medical records. Mrs. Webb contacted my office 6 times in the past year, desperate to get help for her son, Dr. Silverman revealed. She understood that Marcus was deteriorating, but our involuntary commitment laws are designed to protect individual rights. We couldn't act until he posed an imminent danger to himself or others. The revelation that Helen Webb had tried repeatedly to get help for Marcus sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Dorothy Martinez dabbed her eyes with a tissue, remembering her friend's final words about failing to save her son. The system that was supposed to protect people like Marcus had instead enabled his descent into madness. When it came time for victim impact statements, James Thompson approached the witness stand with heavy steps. The courtroom fell silent as the detective and father struggled to find words that could encompass his pain, his rage, and his slowly growing understanding. "Marcus Webb terrorized my daughter," James began, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "He drugged her, kidnapped her, and put her through an ordeal that no child should ever experience. As her father, every instinct I have screams for revenge." The prosecution side of the courtroom nodded approvingly, but James wasn't finished. "But Emma has taught me something in the weeks since this happened. She's shown me that healing doesn't come from punishment. It comes from understanding and forgiveness. Marcus Webb didn't hurt my daughter because he's evil. He hurt her because he's broken, and our community failed to fix him before that brokenness spread to others." Gasps echoed through the courtroom as James Thompson, the man who had every right to demand vengeance, instead called for compassion. "I want Marcus to get the help he needs, not just for his sake, but so that no other family has to go through what we've been through." Then Judge Reeves made an unprecedented decision. "I'm going to allow the victim herself to speak, if she wishes to do so." Emma Thompson, all of 6 years old, walked to the witness stand with Max beside her and Dorothy's encouraging smile behind her. The courtroom held its collective breath as this tiny girl prepared to address the man who had terrorized her. "Mr. Marcus," Emma began, her young voice clear and strong, "I know you're really sorry about what you did. And I know you miss your little girl Lily very much." Marcus Webb, who had maintained stoic composure throughout the proceedings, began to cry quietly. His shoulders shook as this child, this precious, forgiving child, offered him grace he had never dared hope for. "I forgive you," Emma continued, her words carrying the weight of absolute truth. "But you have to promise to get better, okay? Because there are other sad daddies out there who need help, and maybe you can help them so they don't get confused like you did." The courtroom erupted in chaos. Some spectators wept openly at the display of childish wisdom and forgiveness. Others argued loudly that a 6-year-old couldn't possibly understand the gravity of what she was saying. Judge Reeves banged her gavel repeatedly, calling for order. But the most powerful response came from Marcus himself. He stood up at the defendant's table, tears streaming down his face, and spoke directly to Emma for the first time since that terrible day in his basement. "Emma," he said, his voice breaking, "I am so very sorry. You're right. I was confused and sad, and I hurt you when I was trying to heal myself. If the court allows it, I want to spend the rest of my life making sure that what happened to you never happens to another child." District Attorney Morrison objected vigorously to this emotional manipulation, but Judge Reeves silenced her with a look. The veteran judge had seen thousands of cases in her career, but never anything quite like this. A victim advocating for her perpetrator's redemption rather than his punishment. The legal proceedings took an unexpected turn when Helen Webb's final letter was read aloud in court. Dorothy Martinez, as Helen's closest friend, had been designated to share the deceased woman's final wishes. The letter, written in Helen's careful handwriting before her stroke, contained a shocking revelation. "If my son has harmed someone," Helen had written, "please know that I tried to prevent it. I've left detailed documentation of my attempts to get him help, along with my life insurance policy worth $150,000. I want this money to go toward creating a mental health crisis center in Maplewood so that other families won't suffer as ours has." The courtroom buzzed with whispers as the full scope of Helen Webb's sacrifice became clear. She had used her final moments of clarity to try to transform her family's tragedy into something that could help others. Emma tugged on Dorothy's sleeve and whispered something in her ear. Dorothy smiled through her tears and stood up. "Your Honor, Emma would like to suggest a name for the mental health center. She wants to call it the Lily and Emma Memorial Center so that both little girls can help other people." Marcus Webb completely broke down at this display of grace from the child he had wronged. The man who had kidnapped Emma was gone, replaced by someone who understood the full weight of his actions and the precious gift of forgiveness he was being offered. Judge Reeves called a recess to consider the unprecedented circumstances. In the hallway outside the courtroom, community members debated furiously about justice, mercy, and the role of mental health in criminal behavior. Emma sat quietly with Max and Dorothy, coloring in a book while the adults around her argued about concepts she understood better than any of them. Pastor William Harrison approached James Thompson during the break. "I've been thinking about what Emma said in there," the minister said thoughtfully, "about Marcus helping other sad fathers. What if we took her suggestion seriously?" "What do you mean?" James asked, though something in the pastor's tone suggested an idea was forming. "What if Marcus's sentence included community service, supervised, of course, but meaningful work helping other families in crisis? Emma's forgiveness might have shown us a path to healing that's bigger than just punishment or treatment." The idea was radical, unprecedented, and exactly the kind of creative justice that Judge Reeves was known for considering. As the courtroom reconvened, everyone present understood they were about to witness either a groundbreaking moment in restorative justice or a spectacular failure of the legal system. The decision would rest not just on legal precedent, but on the community's willingness to choose healing over vengeance, hope over fear, and the wisdom of a 6-year-old girl who understood that some wounds could only be healed by love. The moment Judge Patricia Reeves announced her decision, the carefully maintained order in the Maplewood County Courthouse exploded into chaos. The court sentences Marcus Webb to 5 years supervised psychiatric treatment with mandatory community service, to be served in conjunction with the establishment of the Lily and Emma Memorial Mental Health Crisis Center. Half the courtroom erupted in outrage, while the other half wept with relief. "This is a travesty!" shouted Angela Morrison, mother of 3 and leader of the victims' rights group that had formed after Emma's kidnapping. "He drugged and kidnapped a child. Where's the justice in therapy and community service?" But Dorothy Martinez felt her heart break for an entirely different reason. 3 months into what everyone had hoped would be Marcus's healing journey, the experimental treatment program was falling apart. The man who had shown such promise during the trial, who had embraced Emma's forgiveness with genuine remorse, was sliding backward into the darkness that had consumed him after Lily's death. Dr. Patricia Foster paced her office at Maplewood General, reviewing Marcus's latest psychological evaluation with growing concern. "He's stopped taking his medication," she told James Thompson, who had reluctantly agreed to serve on the Community Oversight Board for Marcus's treatment. "Claims the antipsychotics make him feel disconnected from Lily's memory. He's been found talking to empty air again, setting 2 places at dinner in his supervised living facility." The community that had rallied around Emma's message of forgiveness was now questioning whether mercy had been a mistake. The Memorial Mental Health Center, funded by Helen Webb's life insurance and community donations, sat half-built as contractors demanded payment and skeptical town council members threatened to pull municipal funding. Emma herself was struggling more than anyone wanted to admit. The 6-year-old who had shown such remarkable resilience during the immediate aftermath of her kidnapping was now plagued by nightmares that left her screaming for Max in the middle of the night. The German Shepherd, who had never left her side since the rescue, was showing signs of stress-related illness. His coat was losing its luster, and Dr. Martinez had found signs of an ulcer during his last examination. "She keeps asking when Mr. Marcus is going to get better," James confided to Dorothy during one of their weekly coffee meetings. "She blames herself for his setbacks, thinks she didn't forgive him hard enough or well enough." What kind of burden is that for a child to carry? The breaking point came on a gray October morning when Marcus Webb was found unconscious in his room at the Sunrise Assisted Living facility where he'd been placed for supervised treatment. An empty bottle of Helen's leftover antidepressants sat on his nightstand beside a note written in his familiar handwriting. "I can't live with what I did to that little girl. Lily's been waiting for me long enough." The 911 call came in at 6:23 a.m., and by the time the paramedics arrived, Marcus was in cardiac arrest from the overdose. Dr. Foster worked frantically in the emergency room, pumping his stomach and administering activated charcoal while his heart monitor painted erratic rhythms that spoke of a body giving up the fight for life. Emma found out about Marcus's suicide attempt the way children always discover the things adults try to hide from them. She overheard Dorothy crying on the phone with Pastor Harrison. "Is Mr. Marcus going to die?" she asked James directly, her 6-year-old eyes holding a weight that no child should have to bear. James knelt down to Emma's level, Max pressing close against both of them as if sensing the gravity of the moment. "He's very sick, sweetheart. The doctors are doing everything they can to help him." "But I forgave him," Emma whispered, tears starting to fall. "I said it was okay and that he should get better. Why didn't it work?" The question hung in the air like an accusation against everything the community had tried to believe about the power of forgiveness and redemption. How do you explain to a child that forgiveness, no matter how pure and complete, can't always heal wounds that run 15 years deep? Dorothy Martinez, who had been the driving force behind the community's healing efforts, found herself questioning everything she'd advocated for. "Maybe we were wrong," she told Pastor Harrison as they sat in the hospital waiting room where Marcus clung to life. "Maybe some people are too broken to be fixed, and we put that child through false hope for nothing." The media, which had initially celebrated Maplewood's innovative approach to restorative justice, now descended like vultures to document the program's failure. "Forgiveness experiment ends in tragedy," read the headline in the Denver Post. Cable news shows debated whether Emma's forgiveness had been genuine or coached, whether the community had been naive to believe in redemption over punishment. Dr. Foster emerged from the ICU looking exhausted after 18 hours of fighting to save Marcus's life. "He's stable for now, but the overdose caused significant organ damage. Even if he recovers physically, the psychological trauma of attempting suicide—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone understood that Marcus Webb's journey back to mental health had become infinitely more complicated. Emma insisted on visiting Marcus in the hospital, despite James's reluctance and the advice of child psychologists who worried about the emotional impact. "He needs to know I'm not mad at him," she said with the stubborn determination that ran in the Thompson family. "Max wants to see him too." The sight of Marcus Webb hooked up to machines, his face gray and his breathing assisted by a ventilator, nearly broke James's resolve to let Emma say goodbye. But Dorothy, who had been Helen Webb's friend for 30 years, squeezed his shoulder and whispered, "Sometimes children see things we can't. Maybe she knows something we don't." Emma approached Marcus's bedside with Max at her side, the German Shepherd showing none of his previous wariness around the man who had once threatened his little girl. Instead, Max seemed to sense that Marcus was no longer a danger, but a fellow wounded creature in need of comfort. "Mr. Marcus," Emma said softly, taking his cold hand in her small, warm one, "I'm not mad that you tried to go see Lily, but she's not ready for you yet. She wants you to stay here and help other sad daddies first." To everyone's amazement, Marcus's eyes fluttered open. The man, who had been unresponsive for 3 days, looked directly at Emma with an expression that held more clarity than anyone had seen since his arrest. "Emma," he whispered through the breathing tube, "I'm sorry I couldn't be stronger." "You don't have to be strong all by yourself," Emma replied with 6-year-old wisdom that silenced the adults in the room. "That's why we have friends and doctors and dogs and people who love us. Lily knows that now." Max, responding to some instinct that transcended species barriers, gently placed his head on Marcus's chest, just over his heart. The simple gesture of comfort from the dog who had once fought to protect Emma from this same man created a moment of grace that no one present would ever forget. Dr. Foster, monitoring Marcus's vital signs, watched in amazement as his heart rate stabilized and his breathing became less labored. "I've seen therapy animals work miracles," she murmured to James, "but this is something else entirely." Outside Marcus's room, the community that had gathered to say goodbye found themselves witnessing something they hadn't expected. Not an ending, but a new beginning. Emma's forgiveness hadn't failed. It had simply required more time and faith than anyone had imagined possible. Dorothy Martinez wiped tears from her weathered cheeks as she watched the scene through the hospital room window. "Lord help me," she whispered to Pastor Harrison. "I think that little girl just taught us all something about the difference between fixing people and loving them." The Lily and Emma Memorial Mental Health Center was still unfinished. Marcus Webb was still broken, and the community was still divided about justice versus mercy. But in that hospital room, surrounded by machines and monitors and the steady presence of a German Shepherd who understood forgiveness better than most humans, something shifted. The tragedy wasn't over, but neither was the hope. And sometimes, in the darkest moments, that's all that stands between despair and the possibility of healing. The revelation came 3 weeks after Marcus's suicide attempt, hidden in a shoebox beneath Helen Webb's bed, that Dorothy Martinez discovered while finally cleaning out her deceased friend's belongings. Inside, wrapped in faded tissue paper, were dozens of video recordings spanning 15 years. Grainy footage from a security camera Helen had secretly installed in her living room when Marcus's behavior first began to worry her. Dorothy's hands trembled as she loaded the first disc into her old DVD player, not knowing she was about to uncover a truth that would shatter everything the community thought they knew about the Webb family tragedy. The timestamp read June 6th, 9 years earlier, Lily's death anniversary, and showed Marcus sitting alone at his kitchen table, tears streaming down his face as he spoke to an empty chair. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you, baby girl," the younger Marcus whispered on the recording. "Daddy tried so hard to reach you in time, but the water was so deep and you were so little." The camera captured him setting out birthday cake and singing happy birthday to no one, his voice breaking on every word. But it was the next recording that made Dorothy gasp aloud. Dated 2 years later, it showed Helen Webb, still mobile before her stroke, pleading with someone on the telephone. "Please, you have to help him," Helen's recorded voice begged. "My son is talking to his dead daughter, and I'm afraid he's going to hurt himself or someone else. I've called your office 6 times, and you keep telling me he has to be in imminent danger before you can act." Dorothy fast-forwarded through months of recordings, watching Helen document Marcus's deteriorating mental state with the methodical precision of a mother who knew she was running out of time to save her son. There were videos of Marcus having full conversations with Lily's ghost, videos of him setting up elaborate tea parties for a child who existed only in his broken mind, videos of Helen's increasingly desperate attempts to get professional help. The most damning recording was dated 6 months before Emma's kidnapping. Helen, already weakened by her recent stroke but still able to speak, was on the phone with Dr. Patricia Foster's office. "He's been watching the neighbor's little girl," Helen's slurred speech revealed. Says she looks just like Lily. I'm scared, doctor. I'm so scared of what he might do. The response from the medical office was captured clearly on the recording. Mrs. Webb, unless your son has made specific threats or taken concrete actions, our hands are tied by patient confidentiality laws. We can't force treatment on someone who hasn't committed a crime. Dorothy sank into her recliner, the weight of the discovery crushing her chest like a physical blow. Helen Webb hadn't just tried to get help for Marcus. She had predicted exactly what would happen and been ignored by a system designed to protect individual rights rather than prevent tragedies. The final recording was the most heartbreaking of all. Shot just days before Helen's fatal stroke, it showed the elderly woman struggling to walk, her speech barely comprehensible as she spoke directly to the camera. If you're watching this, Dorothy, then something terrible has happened and my Marcus has done what I feared he would do. I tried to stop it. God knows I tried. But I failed him, just like I failed to teach him how to live with losing Lily. Helen's recorded image continued, her words slow but clear. In my jewelry box, there's a letter I wrote to that little girl next door, Emma. If Marcus hurts her, please give it to her. And please don't let the community hate him. He's not evil. He's just broken, and I couldn't fix him in time. Dorothy's hands shook as she retrieved the letter from Helen's jewelry box. The envelope was addressed to Emma Thompson in Helen's careful script, and inside was a message that would change everything once again. Dear sweet Emma, the letter began. If you're reading this, it means my son Marcus has hurt you because his mind got confused about who you are. I am so very sorry. I tried to stop him, but sometimes grown-ups can't fix the broken parts of other grown-ups, no matter how much we love them. Marcus loved his little girl Lily so much that when she died, part of his mind died too. When he sees you playing in your yard, his broken mind thinks you are Lily. Come back to him. It's not your fault, sweetie. It's not even really Marcus's fault. Sometimes, sad things happen that break people in ways that can't be healed. The letter continued with instructions for a trust fund Helen had secretly established using her late husband's pension, $50,000, earmarked specifically for Emma's therapy and education, plus another $100,000 designated for mental health services in Maplewood. But the most shocking revelation came in the letter's final paragraph. Emma, I need you to know that your daddy, Mr. James, once saved my Marcus's life. It was 3 years ago, during that terrible ice storm. Marcus had wandered out into the blizzard, talking to Lily's ghost, and your daddy found him nearly frozen to death. Mr. James carried Marcus home and never told anyone how sick he was because Marcus begged him not to. Your daddy has a good heart. But sometimes, good people get caught between helping and hurting without meaning to. Dorothy's phone rang, startling her from the devastating revelations. James Thompson's voice was tight with controlled emotion. Dorothy, I need to tell you something. Something I should have shared months ago. About the ice storm? Dorothy asked quietly. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for long seconds. How did you? Never mind. Yes, about the ice storm. I found Marcus that night, hypothermic and talking to empty air about saving Lily from drowning. I should have reported it, should have gotten him committed for evaluation, but he begged me not to destroy his mother's final months with worry about his mental state. You couldn't have known what would happen, Dorothy said, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. Couldn't I? James's voice cracked. I'm a detective, Dorothy. I'm trained to recognize dangerous situations, and I chose to protect Marcus's secret instead of protecting my own daughter. If I had reported his condition that night, Emma never would have been kidnapped. The community's carefully constructed narrative of Marcus as a sudden threat was crumbling under the weight of these revelations. He hadn't been a predator who had targeted Emma. He had been a mentally ill man whose deterioration had been documented, reported, and ignored by multiple systems designed to help people like him. Dr. Foster's review of Helen's recordings led to immediate changes in the county's mental health protocols, but it was too late to undo the damage to the Webb family or the trauma inflicted on Emma. The videos also revealed the extent to which the community had failed to recognize and respond to obvious signs of mental illness in their midst. Pastor Harrison called an emergency community meeting to address the new evidence. "We're all complicit in what happened to Emma Thompson," he told the packed church sanctuary. "Not because we intended harm, but because we chose to look away when our neighbor needed help. Helen Webb spent years trying to save her son and protect our children, and we failed to hear her cries for help." The revelation that James Thompson had previously encountered Marcus in a psychotic state and chosen not to report it sent new shockwaves through the community. Some residents felt betrayed by the detective's silence, while others understood the impossible position he had been placed in. Emma, now 7 years old and still processing her own trauma, listened quietly as the adults around her struggled with guilt, blame, and the complex realities of mental illness. When Dorothy showed her Helen's letter, Emma's response was characteristically wise and forgiving. "Mrs. Helen was trying to keep everyone safe," Emma said simply, "and Daddy was trying to be kind to Mr. Marcus." "Sometimes when you try to help people, it gets confusing and things still go wrong." Max, who had become Emma's constant companion and unofficial therapy dog, seemed to sense the emotional weight of the revelations. The German Shepherd stayed close to Emma during the community meetings, offering silent comfort to anyone who needed it, including Marcus Webb, who was slowly recovering from his suicide attempt under intensive psychiatric care. The truth had finally emerged, but it brought more questions than answers about responsibility, prevention, and the thin line between protecting individual privacy and protecting community safety. 5 years later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of the Lily and Emma Memorial Mental Health Crisis Center as Emma Thompson, now 11 years old, walked through the halls with Max by her side. The German Shepherd, graying around the muzzle but still devoted to his girl, wore a red therapy dog vest that had become as familiar to the center's clients as Emma's warm smile. "Good morning, Mr. Marcus," Emma called out as they passed the office where Marcus Webb worked as a peer counselor, helping other parents navigate the crushing grief of losing children. The man who had once kidnapped her was now one of her closest allies in helping families heal from unimaginable loss. Marcus looked up from his desk where he was reviewing intake forms for new clients. His face, once hollow with madness and despair, now carried the peaceful expression of someone who had found purpose in his pain. "Morning, Emma." "Max," he said softly, his voice holding the gentle tone of hard-won wisdom. "Mrs. Henderson is coming in today with her husband. They lost their son in that car accident last month." Emma nodded seriously, understanding the weight of such meetings. "Max and I will be here if they need us," she promised, her hand resting on the dog's head. Over the years, she and Max had become an unofficial therapy team, offering comfort to families in crisis with a presence that spoke louder than any words could. The center, funded by Helen Webb's life insurance and sustained by community donations, had become a model for rural mental health care. Dorothy Martinez, now 80 years old but still sharp as a tack, served as volunteer coordinator, matching families in crisis with the support they needed. Her office walls were covered with thank you letters from people whose lives had been saved by early intervention. James Thompson had taken early retirement from the police force to become the center's director, his law enforcement experience proving invaluable in navigating the complex intersection of mental health and public safety. Sometimes the best way to prevent crime is to heal the hurt that causes it, he often told visiting officials who came to study Maplewood's innovative approach. Pastor Harrison conducted weekly grief support groups in the center's chapel, where parents like Marcus found strength and shared stories of loss and hope. The walls bore photos of children who had died too young, including a smiling picture of 6-year-old Lily Webb, forever frozen in time, but finally at peace. Emma paused at Lily's photograph and whispered, "Thank you for sharing your daddy with us. He's helping lots of people now." Max wagged his tail gently, as if he understood that some angels work through broken hearts made whole again. In Maplewood, they had learned that healing happens not in spite of tragedy, but because of how communities choose to respond to it with love, forgiveness, and the courage to transform pain into purpose. Dear friends, this story of Emma, Max, and Marcus reminds us that life's greatest tragedies can become our most profound teachers. How many of us have watched neighbors struggle in silence, seen signs we didn't recognize, or carried guilt about moments when we could have reached out, but didn't? In our golden years, we understand that forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the courage to choose healing over hurt, community over judgment. Emma's 6-year-old wisdom teaches us that broken people aren't disposable. They're fellow travelers who need love to find their way home. Marcus transformed from a threat into a healer because someone believed redemption was possible. Dorothy Martinez, at 75, became a catalyst for change by refusing to let tragedy have the final word. Max showed us that loyalty transcends fear, and true protection sometimes means staying close while hearts heal. This story speaks to every grandparent who worries about their grandchildren's safety, every neighbor who's wondered if they should intervene, every person who's struggled with loss. In Maplewood, they learned that communities heal together or break apart together. The choice is always ours. What neighbor in your life might need someone to truly see them? Have you ever experienced the healing power of unexpected forgiveness? Share your thoughts below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.